They made the world jump, but they never learned how to land. Before Atlanta became the heartbeat of hip-hop, before trap beats ruled the charts, there were two kids in backward jeans who made history without even knowing it. Kris Kross, two first graders who turned the mall encounter into a global phenomenon. They didn't rap about the streets or money. They rapped about being young, wild, and free. And for one shining moment in 1992, the whole world danced to their rhythm. Their hit Jump stayed at #1 for 8 straight weeks. Their faces were on magazine covers, cereal boxes, and video games. Michael Jackson took them on tour. Every kid in America wanted to wear their clothes backward. For a generation growing up between innocence and ambition, Kris Kross were more than rappers, they were a mirror. They made it feel okay to dream out loud. But fame moves fast, and when the spotlight shifts, not everyone finds their way back to the light. Behind the applause, one of those boys, Chris Kelly, the Mac Daddy, was quietly fighting battles no one could see. The same music that lifted him up would one day fail to catch him when he fell. This is not just the story of a child star. It's the story of what happens when a dream grows faster than the boy who dreamed it, and of how a beat that once made the world jump still echoes today for those who remember and for those who never will. Before the fame, before the lights and the backward jeans, there was just Chris Kelly, a quiet kid from Atlanta with a head full of music and a mother who believed in him. He was born on the 11th of August, 1978, and like many kids in the South, his world revolved around rhythm, not the kind that came from money or machines, but from living rooms and radios. His mother, Donna Kelly Pratt, filled their home with Run D, MC, Eric B, and Rakim, Michael Jackson, and old school R&B. That was how Chris learned to feel before he ever learned to rhyme. At school, he met another boy named Chris Smith, just as mischievous, just as full of energy. They became inseparable, two kids who talked in beats and moved in rhythm. By 3rd grade, they were already performing little routines at local events and school talent shows, calling themselves the Two Crises. Their friendship was the kind that could only come from childhood, simple, fearless, and built on laughter. But Atlanta, in the early 90s, wasn't known for hip-hop yet. New York had the grit. LA had the glamour. Atlanta was still finding its sound. Then fate walked into a mall. One afternoon, while hanging out at Greenbrier Mall, their favorite spot to people watch, the boys noticed a female rap group, Silk Times Leather, surrounded by fans. Their producer, a young Jermaine Dupri, was there too, watching the commotion. He noticed something different. The crowd wasn't just excited about the group. They were drawn to the two kids watching them. There was something magnetic about their confidence. They weren't stars yet, but they moved like they already were. Jermaine asked, "What do y'all do to get people's attention like that?" Chris Smith grinned and said, "We just cool like that." That one line changed their lives. Jermaine saw what most producers never do. He saw potential before talent, a spark before a flame. He invited them to his studio to record a demo. The boys were only 10 and 11, but their voices carried something older, rhythm, charm, and the kind of innocence that couldn't be faked. At first, they called themselves Chris and Chris, but Jermaine, always the visionary, decided on a name that felt playful, rhythmic, and catchy: Kris Kross. He also had an idea that would make them unforgettable. At the time, oversized clothes were the trend. Jermaine told them, "Turn your clothes around. Let's see what happens." They did, and the reaction was instant. Everywhere they went, people pointed, laughed, clapped. They had turned rebellion into fashion. A simple flip that symbolized everything. They were young, fearless, and different. Within a year, Jermaine secured a deal with Rough House, divided by Columbia Records. He wrote and produced their first single, Jump. When the beat dropped, it was undeniable, a song that sounded like childhood and chaos all at once. In 1992, Jump hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 8 straight weeks, selling over 2 million copies. The world had never seen anything like them. Two kids who made adults dance and made children dream. Almost overnight, Kris Kross became a cultural earthquake. Their faces were everywhere. TV, magazines, Sprite commercials, and even Michael Jackson's Dangerous tour. They were living the fantasy every kid wished for. But for Kris Kelly, still just 13, it was more than fame. It was the start of a life he could barely understand. He wasn't just making the world jump. He was learning what it felt like to fly. And like every flight that soars too high, the fall would one day come. In 1992, the world moved to the sound of two kids from Atlanta. Kris Kross didn't just release a hit, they caused a movement. Their debut single, Jump, exploded like lightning, sitting at the top of the Billboard Hot 100 for 8 straight weeks. Every school dance, every radio station, every house party played that same infectious chant, Jump, Jump. The world couldn't get enough of them. Two boys with backward genes and boundless energy had somehow captured the innocence and rebellion of an entire generation. It wasn't about violence or wealth or ego. It was about joy, pure, loud, contagious joy. The album, Totally Crossed Out, sold over 4 million copies and topped both the Billboard 200 and the R&B divided by hip-hop charts. In an era when most rappers were grown men telling hard stories, these two kids gave hip-hop permission to smile again. They were everywhere. On MTV, A Different World, in living color. Yo! MTV Raps. Even Michael Jackson, the biggest entertainer on earth, wanted them to open for him on the Dangerous World Tour. And when they appeared in his Jam video alongside Michael Jordan and Heavy D, it felt like the universe itself was co-signing their success. They became symbols of a new kind of fame, the kind born from energy, not experience. They sold Sprite, Sega, Nickelodeon. They even voiced raps for Rugrats. Every kid in America wanted to be them, dress like them, move like them. They were more than stars. They were blueprints for what youth culture could be. But behind the screaming fans and platinum plaques, Kris Kelly McDaddy was still a boy trying to make sense of it all. He didn't have the luxury of growing up quietly. He was learning life lessons in limousines, trying to balance fame with homework, and recording songs between math tests. Tutors followed them from city to city as they toured the world, but no classroom could teach them what success really costs. Jermaine Dupri, their mentor, became the architect of Atlanta's rise, and Kris Kross was the first brick. Their success opened doors for a generation of Southern artists who would later define hip-hop, Outkast, T.I., Ludacris, and so many more. Atlanta was no longer an afterthought. It was the new capital of rhythm. Their second album, Da Bomb, arrived in 1993. It went platinum, introducing dancehall influences with All Right featuring Supercat and helping launch the career of Da Brat, who they discovered during a concert in Chicago. They were growing up, experimenting with harder beats and more streetwise lyrics, a reflection of how the hip-hop world itself was changing. Gangsta rap was dominating the airwaves, and innocence didn't sell like it used to. Even so, Kris Kross managed to evolve without losing their chemistry. By 1996, they released Young, Rich, and Dangerous, an album that showed a more mature sound, a little darker, a little wiser. The single Tonight's the Night hit #1 on the rap charts, while Live and Die for hip-hop brought together Jermaine Dupri, Da Brat, Mr., Black, and Aaliyah, who was just beginning her own journey to stardom. But fans began to notice something different about Kris Kelly. His hair was thinning. Bold patches showed on camera. Rumors spread that he was sick, maybe cancer. In interviews, he explained calmly, "It's alopecia. I've had it since I was 4. Even then, he smiled. He'd learned early how to turn vulnerability into strength. For Kris Kross, the mid-90 seconds marked both a peak and a pause. They were no longer kids, but not yet men. And in a business that only celebrates what's new, growing up often means fading out. The world that once jumped for them was already dancing to someone else's beat. Fame never warns you when it's about to leave. It just fades like the last note of a song you thought would never end. By the late 90 seconds, Kris Kross had grown up, and the world had moved on. The backward jeans were no longer cool. Hip-hop had gotten harder. Heavier, a new sound ruled by gangsta rap and street realism. The innocence that once made Kris Kross famous now made them seem out of place. After the release of Young, Rich and Dangerous, the group decided to take a break. Chris Smith focused on writing and acting, and Chris Kelly, the Mac Daddy, went looking for something deeper than fame, something that felt like purpose. He enrolled in school to study sound engineering, wanting to understand music beyond performance, to rebuild from the inside. For a while, it worked. He started his own label, C Records, Crazy Cool Connections, and began mentoring young artists around Atlanta. He was no longer the kid who made the world jump. He was the man helping others find their rhythm. But the industry had changed. Atlanta was booming again with Outkast, Ludacris, and T.I. taking over the airwaves. But Chris wasn't part of that new wave. He had gone from the front row of fame to watching from the back seat. And sometimes, that kind of quiet can feel heavier than failure. Friends said he never really got over it, the feeling of being needed, of being seen. He'd walk into a club and hear Jump playing, people smiling, shouting lyrics that once belonged to his childhood. And while everyone else was celebrating nostalgia, he was remembering what it cost him. The years that followed were scattered with attempts to come back, short studio sessions, half-written songs, flashes of the old energy. But drugs had already started whispering in the background. At first, it was just to numb the pressure, the loneliness. Then it became a habit. Cocaine, heroin, the same vices that swallowed so many artists who rose too fast, too young. Those close to him said he tried to fight it. He'd disappear for weeks, then reappear sober and smiling, promising he was done. His mother, Donna, stayed by his side through it all. She saw both the boy he was and the man the world forgot. She said he wanted to be better, that he was tired of the pain, tired of the cycle. But addiction isn't a battle you win once. It's a war that keeps coming back for you. In February 2013, hope flickered again. Jermaine Dupri organized a So Def 20th anniversary concert, bringing Kris Kross back to the stage. When Chris Kelly and Chris Smith performed Jump that night, the crowd erupted, thousands of people screaming, reliving their childhoods. For a moment, it felt like 1,992 all over again. The lights, the love, the laughter, it was back. And for the first time in years, Chris Kelly looked happy. But sometimes, the past can be both comfort and curse. Just months later, on May 1st, 2013, paramedics found Chris unresponsive on his couch. He had mixed heroin and cocaine, a deadly combination known as a speedball. They tried CPR, but it was too late. He was 34 years old. His mother said he had been sick the night before, complaining of nausea and dizziness. He had been trying to recover, trying to come home, but in the end, the same world that lifted him up couldn't catch him when he fell. The headlines called it an overdose. But for those who knew him, it wasn't drugs that killed Chris Kelly, it was the silence that comes after applause. When the news broke on May 1st, 2013, America paused. The kids who grew up in the 90 seconds suddenly felt a piece of their childhood disappear. Chris Kelly, the boy who once made the world jump, was gone. He was only 34. For millions, it wasn't just another celebrity headline. It was personal. Because Kris Kross wasn't just a group, they were a memory, a symbol of simpler days when music still felt innocent and fun. People didn't just remember the song, they remembered who they were when they first heard it. That's what made the loss hurt so deeply. Social media turned into a digital memorial. Artists, fans, and friends from across the world posted tributes. Jermaine Dupri, heartbroken, wrote, "To the world, you were the Mac Daddy. To me, you were my son, my friend. You taught me how to see magic in youth." And Chris Smith, the other half of Kris Kross, stood at Kelly's funeral and struggled through tears to speak. Our bond was never about music. It was about growing up together, surviving together. In Atlanta, radio stations played Jump every hour that week. People gathered downtown, some still wearing their jeans backward in tribute. For a generation that had grown up, gotten jobs, raised families, this was how they said goodbye to their childhood. The media revisited Kris Kross's legacy, finally giving them the credit they always deserved. Before Outkast, before T.I., before Ludacris, it was two kids who made the world pay attention to Atlanta. They proved that Southern hip-hop could be both mainstream and magical. They were the first spark of a fire that still burns today. In a rare moment of unity, every corner of the rap world, from old-school pioneers to modern trap artists, spoke the same truth. Kris Kelly didn't just make music. He made people feel good about being young, about being themselves. In Oakland, Chicago, and Los Angeles, DJs dropped Jump at midnight as a tribute. Clubs erupted with joy and nostalgia, laughter, tears, and the same chant that once shook the world. Jump! Jump! That night, it didn't feel like mourning. It felt like remembering. Because in the end, Kris Kelly's story wasn't just about tragedy. It was about joy, pure, electric, unforgettable joy, and how it lingers, even when the lights go out. The beat that made the world jump was silent now, but across America, hearts still moved to its rhythm. There are songs that fade when the radio turns off, and there are songs that keep playing in your soul long after the world goes quiet. Jump was one of those songs. More than 30 years later, it still brings people back to a time when everything felt possible, when the biggest problems were school dances, mixtapes, and whether your jeans were backward enough. That was the gift Kris Kelly left behind. He made the world lighter for a while. He made it fun to be young. But beyond the music, his story became a quiet lesson about what happens when fame finds a child before life has had the chance to teach them who they are. He was only 13 when the spotlight found him, and for the rest of his life, he kept trying to live up to a moment the world wouldn't let him forget. It's a story older than hip-hop itself, the price of being extraordinary too soon. Yet, even in the pain, there's something beautiful. Because Kris Kelly never lost his love for the music. Even when the charts forgot his name, he kept creating, producing, mentoring, dreaming. He didn't need a crowd to validate his rhythm. The beat was already inside him. For Atlanta, his legacy is undeniable. Before trap, before the modern South became the capital of American hip-hop, it was two kids, Mac Daddy and Daddy Mac, who opened the door. Every artist who came after them walks through that door still. In his mother's words, Kris was more than a star, he was my son, and he was loved. And maybe that's what this story really is. Not about fame or loss, but love. A mother's love. A city's love. The love of a generation that still smiles every time that beat drops. So tonight, wherever you are, if you ever jumped to that song, if it ever made you laugh, or dance, or remember, take a moment, close your eyes, hear the crowd, feel that bass, and whisper a thank you to the boy who made the world jump. Because legends don't always wear crowns. Sometimes they just wear their clothes backward and remind us that joy, even fleeting joy, is still worth the dance.